Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com.
Triangulation episode 274, recorded Wednesday, 11/16/2016, for Monday, 11/21/2016. Will Oremus. This episode of Triangulation is brought to you by Optical Cables by Corning. Corning's incredibly durable Thunderbolt and USB 3.0 optical cables are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com to learn more. And by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers over 1,500 documentaries and nonfiction series from the world's best filmmakers. Get unlimited access starting at just $2.99 a month. And for our audience, the first 2 months are completely free if you sign up at curiositystream.com/twit and use the offer code TWIT. Welcome to Triangulation. I am filling in for Leo Laporte today. So it's been about 2 weeks since the election in the United States. Everyone, no matter who you voted for, is probably still a little bit shocked. We're all in the blame stage, I think. Well, some of us are in the blame stage. Some of us are in the celebration stage. Some of us are in the blame stage, and we're thinking, like, what happened here? Is it globalization? Is it, America's lack of faith in democracy? Is it, changing demographics? What is it? And it seems like all of that is a little bit too abstruse for some of us to blame. So a lot of people are just deciding to blame the place that they spend the better part of their day, and that's Facebook. So that's where a lot of people are right now. So Will Oremus from Slate has been writing about this and Facebook's role, if any, what their role is. And so I invited him to talk to me today. Welcome, Will.
Good to be here.
So I've talked to you before. You're one of my favorite reporters, the intersection of technology and politics. So if anyone's not ready to talk about politics, just a warning, a trigger warning here. We're going to be talking about politics, but hopefully in a way that's open and honest and try to figure out what's going on. So let's start, since we're going to be talking about Facebook, I want to start a little bit with you, because you went to Stanford. You were the editor of the Stanford Daily, and one of the first issues where you were an editor was the front page article was about this new social network called the Facebook. So what was it like back then when you were just hearing about what was called the Facebook at that point?
Oh, you found it. Wow. Yeah. Well, I have to say, I'm actually sort of proud of this. People thought that there was some discussion among the editors of the student paper at the time. Again, this was 2004. So the Facebook was less than a year old, I think. And it was the Facebook, or thefacebook.com, as we called it. And a lot of people thought it was like a trivial thing to put on the front page of our first edition of the newspaper. It actually wasn't the piece that you have up right now. It was a different piece, but it was about how, for the first time, the freshmen who were arriving on campus already sort of knew each other, or they virtually knew each other. They had made friends on thefacebook.com, and we had a piece that was examining, what that meant. And I'm looking at it right now. There was a quote from somebody who said, "The Facebook is a bad thing. We start forming images of residents, which is against the Stanford philosophy of everyone starting off on an equal footing." So even then, before 99.9% of the world had ever heard of Facebook, there was controversy about what it was doing to our social fabric, which I found kind of fantastic and delightful.
So at that point, did you ever imagine what it would become, or was it just another thing? I guess Friendster existed, MySpace existed. Did you see what it? Did you have any imagination about what it might become back then?
I don't think even Mark Zuckerberg had an idea what it would become back then. I think what I can say is that those other social networks, the Friendster, Orkuts, even MySpace, I think was pretty new back then. It wasn't like the huge phenomenon that it would become yet, or it was on its way. When the Facebook came along, it felt different. I think it was partly because it was so intimate to start with. It was just on a few college campuses. So you felt like you could say anything. I mean, there were no strangers on there. There were no professors, no parents, no, younger kids. It felt like a safe space to say whatever you wanted. So people used it to flirt, to talk about their partying, their hookups. And that sort of gave it this excitement that I think we've seen to jump like a decade forward in time. We've seen from Snapchat too, is that the idea that you can say anything is really powerful and lends a lot of momentum to a social network. And I think that was what was different about it at the start. And of course now it's just the opposite. I mean, Facebook is the place where you have to be really careful what you say because you never know who's going to read it. But by now it's obviously established itself as a very different and much bigger thing than it was originally.
So in January, you went to the Facebook campus. You got to look a little bit, as much as they would allow you to look at the algorithm, and talk to some people. Was that the first time that you'd been there as a reporter?
It was the first time I'd been to their giant Frank Gehry designed Menlo Park compound, which is quite something. I think they claim, I don't know how you prove this, they claim it's the largest open office in the world. But I've been to several iterations of Facebook offices, actually. So when Facebook first came out, when Mark Zuckerberg first came out to Palo Alto from Harvard, actually, can I tell you a funny anecdote, a personal anecdote about this?
Yes, please.
All right. So I had been in touch early on. I had been in touch with Mark. I didn't know him, but I had been in touch with him because I was editor of the Stanford paper. And Stanford was one of the first schools that Facebook came to. And they had this little feature called In the News, where they would, if you had been mentioned in the student newspaper, that would show up on your profile. I thought it was pretty cool, but it was out of date. So I like just sent a message to this guy. I think at the time he was anonymous. He was just called The Creator. I sent a message to The Creator. Have we all forgotten? Have we collectively forgotten that Mark Zuckerberg used to be The Creator?
I had forgotten, or never even knew that.
Yeah. So anyway, I sent a message to this anonymous guy who ran Facebook, and mentioned that there seemed to be a bug or something, and he got back to me and said, "Yeah, we're taking that. We're actually taking that offline for a while. We got to figure out what it's going to be and how it's going to work." And then I didn't think any more of it. And then the next summer, so this would have been the summer of 2005. Was it the summer of 2005? Maybe it was the summer of 2004. Actually, it was that same summer. He messaged me and said, "Hey, I just moved out to Palo Alto. I don't know anybody. What are some cool things to do around here?" And I just flat out ignored him.
Oh, that's sad.
I didn't respond. I had this stuff going on. As my girlfriend at the time had just moved in with me. I was doing an internship at the San Jose Mercury News. Didn't really have time to hang out with this random tech guy who had built this social network. That's the last I've ever personally interacted with Mark Zuckerberg. But to get back to your original question, I've actually forgotten what that was. So why don't you? I've derailed this, and why don't you re-rail it a little bit?
Well, I like the place that you've gone here. I mean, when you were watching the movie, like the Social Network movie, were you waiting for like your character, like the guy who dissed Mark Zuckerberg and created, turned him into who he is?
No, but I did look at the depiction of that the party pad in Palo Alto with the Justin Timberlake, Sean Parker character, getting everybody, I don't know, handing around drugs or getting everybody to do body shots, and like it was like a swimming pool or something. I was like, damn, that looked kind of fun, but also extremely douchey, and so. Maybe it's for the best that I missed all that.
So now, were you in college there, or were you working at the Palo Alto Daily News then, or was that later?
So the interaction that I'm mentioning was the summer of 2004. So that was before my last year at Stanford and before I edited the paper. And then after that, after I graduated from Stanford, I did several newspaper internships and ended up back in the Bay Area, covering first the city of San Mateo and then the city of Palo Alto for a bunch of local newspapers.
Okay, so my question was, when you went
I remember
when you went to the Facebook campus, and
was that my first time?
Yeah, and when you were looking around waiting for Mark Zuckerberg to jump out and say, "You never email me back, dude."
I'm sure this bitterness has really driven him to all of his life success. So anyway, I've seen the little tiny first office that they had in Palo Alto with like 6 people. I saw the bigger office they had in downtown Palo Alto on University Avenue. I visited the office they had on California Avenue, a little bit further south in Palo Alto when they were getting too big for downtown. And then late last year, I visited the Menlo Park headquarters, and how Facebook has grown. It's huge and it's imposing, and it's kind of an amazing place. There are these screens all over the place that give these real-time metrics, and one of the big things they're looking at is page load times. I mean, I think this is becoming better understood with all the debate about ad blockers and websites being buggy and slow to load and the mobile web being doomed, but I still think people don't appreciate just how seriously Facebook takes page load times and how much of a priority they make that. They really think that friction of loading a page is intolerable.
And do you think that actual people feel that way?
I have no idea. That's a really good question. What I can say is that Facebook is an incredibly data-driven company. They measure everything, and this is one of the things I find so fascinating about Facebook. The news feed the algorithm is driven by all kinds of data, like more kinds of data on user behavior, and now survey data than you can possibly imagine. So I will say that if Facebook thinks that page loads are really important to the user experience, I'm gonna trust them on that, because they can measure the effect of all sorts of tiny variables in the finest ways, and this is what they do all day. I mean, much of Facebook, at least the engineering side, is about finding new ways to measure what drives engagement, what stands in the way of engagement. What measurements they have might be misleading them in one way or another. They have metrics on their metrics, and they have meetings and do slide decks and decide which metrics to listen to and which ones to ignore, and that's a lot of what goes on at Facebook.
So in 2005, you were chosen as the Daniel Pearl Memorial Journalism Intern. That internship was created in honor of Daniel Pearl, who was murdered in Pakistan, and while working on a story. I'm going to read a little bit from your application essay.
Oh, no. I was so young.
You were so young. But this was really wise. In a time of red states and blue states, I guess this was 2005, or you wrote it maybe in 2004. In a time of red states and blue states, a time when televised shouting matches between liberal and conservative ideologues passed for political journalism, the world could benefit from having more people like Daniel Pearl. He didn't approach controversial topics by getting quotes from the loudest and most intractable voices on each side of the debate. He approached regular people. He learned their hopes and fears and conveyed their struggles in their articles. In doing so, he gave readers fuller, deeper, and more human stories than they could ever get from the talking heads. Now, that was 2000. That was over a decade ago. How do you think journalism has changed since then, and how has technology, and in particular Facebook and Twitter, really changed even from that time when you talk about things being intractable? How has it changed in over a decade?
That's a great question. It's changed so much in just the past decade. So at the time, I had in mind like CNN's Crossfire show. You remember that show was it Tucker Carlson and his name's escaping me, and this is really bad. But it was the conservative guy in the bow tie and the liberal guy, and they were sort of the stereotypes of their respective sides, and they would shout over each other, and you would never, the discussion would never involve any common ground or agreement or forward progress on the issues. But what I will say is that it was intelligent and it was fact-based, and to think that was the worst we had to worry about in political media in that time now feels sort of quaint. I think social media have done wonderful, amazing things for the media and for the news and for political discourse, and they've also done horrific, awful things. And so I think it's always a mixed bag. And what we saw in this election is that at least one way of interpreting it is that Facebook, I think in particular, has helped to really erode the public's trust in the media even further. Granted, the media has helped to erode the public's trust in the media, but really the mainstream media today are not any worse than they ever were before. And yet public confidence in what they report is at all-time lows. And in fact, you could make the case that a lot of Donald Trump's campaign was based on a rejection of the media. It was a sort of a rebellion against the liberal elite, which he and his supporters took to include institutions like the New York Times and the Washington Post. I think Facebook has really helped to make that possible, because it used to be that you would go to the New York Times because you would go there regularly. You would be a regular reader because you trusted them, or you had grown to understand their approach to journalism, and now you will see Facebook has sort of disaggregated the products of journalism. So instead of going to the New York Times and seeing what they have to say day in, day out, you might see a story from the New York Times pop up in your feed alongside a story from Think Progress, or one from Breitbart, or one from the Denver Guardian, which is this fake news site that circulated a viral fake story about a murder related to the Clinton email scandal right before the election. Facebook presents them all identically in your feed. I mean, the format is the same. You have no way of knowing which one to trust and which one not to trust. And so I think that there's this big furor around fake news on Facebook right now. And Mark Zuckerberg is downplaying it and saying, look, fake news probably didn't play any real role in the outcome. It's a small proportion of what you find on Facebook. And in any case, people had probably had their minds made up before they read some false story about the Pope endorsing Donald Trump. That's all probably true. And maybe to some extent, this fake news controversy is missing the bigger picture. But I will say that the fact that fake news can appear right alongside real news in your feed has I think helped to undermine the distinctions between credible news outlets that are fact-based and that have journalistic standards, and sort of fly-by-night websites that either are essentially an ideological arm of a political party, or maybe even as BuzzFeed and The Guardian and others uncovered, they might even be one teenager in Macedonia writing fake pro-Trump stories because they go viral on Facebook and they can make money that way. And the median income in Macedonia is pretty low, and maybe writing fake news stories about U.S. politics is a better way to make money than what else is available in that small town's economy. So I think we have a situation today in the media where Facebook has expanded the diversity of media and of voices available in a good way, and it has opened the door to all sorts of new sources, new approaches to journalism. At the same time, it has made it a lot harder for us all to agree on what the news is or what the facts are, because it's different for all of us, and all of our feeds are completely different depending on our own biases and political leanings.
So do you think this has to do, you're talking about the teenagers in Macedonia, but what about just Facebook's bottom line, or any journalist? Even Slate, where you work, you wrote on Facebook, I should say, that online journalism in particular has to find a business model that prioritizes loyalty over page views. And so do you have, and I think you also wrote that you're not really sure what that is, but do you have any ideas of how that could work?
If I knew how it could work and make money, I would have done it, and I would be rich, and we would all be better off. But people are trying to figure it out. It always happens. It happens in fits and starts. People experiment with different models, and some of them work and some of them fail. The New York Times has done this sort of porous paywall that I think has worked somewhat well to at least give it a to diversify its revenue. What you don't want to be, I think, is entirely dependent on one platform like Facebook for all of your traffic and all of your revenue, because Facebook could at any time change the algorithm. It does this all the time. It did it this summer, in fact, where it started to sort of tune down posts from publishers you follow. Like if you follow Slate on Facebook, you will now see fewer posts from Slate itself. And if you do see a Slate post in your feed, it's probably because a friend of yours shared it. So Facebook put more emphasis on what your friends are sharing and less on what the pages you follow are sharing. These changes could happen at any time. And so it makes sense to try to find other ways as a media company to secure your future. I think the Times has found one way. At Slate, we have something called Slate Plus. It's a membership program. Everything on Slate is still all of the how to say this. Everything we write on Slate that was free and open to the public before is still free and open to the public. However, if you sign up for Slate Plus, you now have access to other content that's sort of like inside baseball stuff. It's like chats with staff members. There are some contests where you get to assign a Slate writer a story, or vote on a headline or that kind of thing. So it's not an essential component of Slate. You don't have to pay in order to read the vast majority of what Slate does. But we started it because of this idea that like we don't want to be entirely dependent on internet display advertising. We don't want to be entirely beholden to Facebook and other social media for all of our revenue. And so we now have this other base of really loyal readers who are so loyal, in fact, that they don't have to pay for Slate, and they still do. And I think that we're going to see more experiments like that. I'm not saying that this is the model or that it'll work. I mean, it's a small fraction of Slate readers who have signed up for this. But I think, I think it's becoming clear to anybody in the media that doesn't want to be commoditized, that doesn't want their product to be treated the same in the Facebook newsfeed as Macedonian click farm stories. You have to find some other way to build loyalty and some other way to monetize your reputation for good journalism than just the number of click-throughs you get from a site like Facebook.
So during all this, when everyone was looking for someone to blame, and during the whole election season, just blaming the media was, it's what's the media? Like that's what the question that a lot of people are asking. Like, who's the media? Are you talking about social media? Are you talking about which media are you talking about? That's been a question that people are really asking. And what's new is because when we talk about the Facebook news feed, like that is not only the Macedonian teenager stories, the New York Times, the Guardian. And it's what my mom did. Like a news feed is just like it's all in this one line. It's friends kitten videos. So what do you say? Like, is there what do you say to people who blame the media or for not just the election, because some people are happy with the results of the election, but just say that the media has gotten us here?
Yeah, I think, this probably isn't going to happen, but I would love it if people would start to think twice before they use the phrase the media, because, maybe the media made sense in an age where you had the broadcast news networks and you had your local major metropolitan daily newspaper, and you had Time and Newsweek, and sort of there was a countable number of major outlets that composed what most people thought of as the media, and they had a lot in common. And maybe then the media was a useful concept, and you could talk about the media and people would know what you meant. I don't think that's really the case anymore. The media today is everything from the New York Times, NBC News, CNN, Fox News, Breitbart, Gizmodo, Lifehacker, Wirecutter. I'm thinking of all these tech publications because that's what I read on a regular basis. But Refinery 29, BuzzFeed, people, Jorge Ramos doing live Facebook streams of his interviews with political figures. It's people broadcasting newsworthy events just from their cell phone, and having that go viral on Facebook. The woman who recorded the video of the black man being shot by police, is that the media? It's part of the media. It shows up there in your Facebook feed right alongside the news that you read. And so it's just, to say anything about the media today, I just think is suspect, because you have to say what media you're talking about, because there are a million different things being said in a million different ways by various media at any given time.
And there's one person very strongly saying that he is not the media, and that's Mark Zuckerberg, who keeps saying that they're not a news organization. They're just a platform. And I think it's becoming more and more clear that he can't just keep saying that. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a really interesting debate. This is the debate that underlies the controversies that we've seen with Facebook involving their trending news feature, where it was accused of having their human editors were accused of having a liberal bias. And then more recently, there's been the controversy over fake news in the news feed, these stories that have no basis in reality and are just made up and are going viral on Facebook. But beneath these controversies is a deeper question, which is what kind of company is Facebook? And the dichotomy that a lot of people are holding up is that, is it a technology company that just provides tools for people to use as they see fit? Or is it a media company that plays an active role in determining what people see and what news people read and whether that news is credible or worth reading? And Facebook has been very insistent that it is not a media company. It's a technology company. They said, look, media companies tell stories. They create content. That's not our business. Our business is providing this platform where people can share stuff. And a lot of what people share is not the media. A lot of what people share is photos of their lives, or it's their personal thoughts, or it's their score on some social game. So Facebook does have a legitimate claim that it's primarily a technology company. It's primarily a tool for connecting people. That said, I think a lot of people, myself included, find it a little disingenuous for Mark Zuckerberg to make it that simple. I mean, just because Facebook is primarily a technology company does not mean that it isn't also one of the most influential forces in the media and in the news. Facebook, the latest Pew survey says, I think that 62% of Americans get news from social media. The vast majority of those are getting it from Facebook. Facebook has become a dominant force. I mean, I don't know. You could argue about whether it's as dominant or more dominant than cable news or any given network, but you could make a fair case that Facebook is the most influential force today in how Americans get their news and how that news is framed. And so the question then is, historically, companies that have helped to decide what people see, what news people read, have accepted a certain set of responsibilities. And whether they live up to them is a different question. But media companies traditionally accept that they have a responsibility not to spread lies. They have a responsibility not to, they are going to obey libel laws. They're going to, they have a responsibility to inform and in some way enlighten or educate their readers or viewers about what's going on in the world. Facebook does not want any of those responsibilities because it's not, they feel like it's not the business they're in. It's not the business they want to be in. They don't want to have meetings of people every day deciding what stories are worth putting out there to Facebook users and what aren't, which sources are legitimate and which aren't. Again, this is all very understandable that Facebook doesn't want these responsibilities. But the fact is, Facebook is actively engaged in determining what people read. It takes on the responsibility to filter out what it deems offensive content. But on a deeper level, its algorithm takes on the role of figuring out which stories people are going to see when they open their feed. And they use all sorts of metrics to determine that. But that is not neutral. I mean, the fact that you see a story at the top of your feed that has been liked and shared by a ton of your friends, that lends itself to you getting a certain kind of news every day. And I think that, I think a lot of people feel that Facebook does and should have a responsibility. If it's going to have that active a role in deciding what news people read, it has some responsibility for the outcome. It has some responsibility for whether it is making people less informed, whether it is making them more extreme in their political views by exposing them primarily to the views of people who already think like them. And Facebook, Facebook just denies all that because it doesn't scale in Silicon Valley lingo. And it just opens them to all sorts of criticism that they don't want. So that question is playing out right now in the form of the fake news controversy, but it's going to be one that continues, I think, for as long as Facebook remains an influential force in the news media.
Well, I want to continue talking about this, but I have to take a break to thank one of our sponsors because that's how we're supported. I wanted to thank Corning. This episode of Triangulation is brought to you by Corning, by Optical Cables by Corning. Corning can greatly improve audio and video workflow. They have a strong, durable, and far-reaching Thunderbolt and USB 3.0 fiber optic cable. So whether you're into high-end video, photography, audio production, or computing, Optical Cables by Corning will allow you to build a convenient workspace. They have a superior long-distance connection. Corning's USB 3.0 and Thunderbolt cables, they're incredibly strong. They're flexible. They have exceptional cable runs of up to 60 meters, that's 200 feet, for Thunderbolt, and 50 meters, that's 165 feet, for USB 3. That makes it easy to move noisy, space-consuming devices away from your workspace that you want to keep quiet. You can bend or walk on Corning cables. Even if they're tangled, it's no problem. They'll keep transmitting at top speeds. Optical Cables by Corning will help you achieve acoustic and electrical isolation so you can enjoy a clutter-free, peaceful work environment. Here's a testimonial. Universal Audio relies on Optical Cables by Corning to achieve acoustic isolation in their studio, where they test new equipment such as their best-selling Thunderbolt audio interfaces. So instead of investing in multiple extenders, adapters, and cables, turn to Optical Cables by Corning to establish the connection you need with just one simple long-length cable. Optical Cables by Corning are available wherever you find all your major electronics, and they're available at professional AV retailers, including Apple stores, Amazon, B&H, and more. Optical Cables by Corning are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com to learn more, and we thank Corning for their support of Triangulation. So, Will, you talked about how it was Facebook's responsibility to not spread fake news. But what responsibility do we have as readers and of sharers of this information to make sure that we're not spreading this or that we're fact checking on our own? What responsibility do you think Facebook users have?
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard to put too much responsibility on the consumers of news. People are busy. They have a few minutes to check their Facebook feed and skim through it, and asking individual users to be the force that fights against fake news or that double checks facts. I think it's asking a lot of people for whom that's not their job, and they have other jobs that are important, and they have their families to take care of. I think it's really the media's role to not serve people a plate full of crap when they open their news feed, or they open your website, or they open your newspaper, or turn on your channel. That said, I mean, yeah, it certainly wouldn't hurt if we all became slightly more savvy consumers of news. I think maybe our educational system these days could have more of a role to play in teaching people to be critical thinkers about what they read, what the media is telling them. And I don't mean critical in the sense that they say, oh, the media is BS and we're not going to believe any of that crap and they're just biased. And so, we're going to ignore their work. That's not what I mean. I mean, by critical, I mean the ability to discern what's true from what's not, what's plausible from what isn't, to know when you're being sold sold propaganda, and to make informed judgments about the credibility of what you're reading. I think that would be great. I think it's something that schools should really look into for the future, because it's not typically a part of curricula. But I think if you're talking about citizenship in this age, that has got to be a huge part of it. But we could all, on a more day-to-day basis, I think we could all maybe, when we see a headline that looks it's amazing, it's shocking, it's unbelievable, take a second to consider maybe it's unbelievable because it's not true. Click through and actually read the thing and look at who the source is. And if it says it's from the Denver Guardian, take a second to Google, what's the Denver Guardian anyway? Is that the Denver newspaper? Oh, no, that's the Denver Post. Well, what is the Denver Guardian? There are no references to this on Google. Maybe I shouldn't share that great Denver Guardian story about how an FBI agent was murdered because he was trying to leak Hillary Clinton's emails or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think on Twitter, I argued this a while back when there were a lot of falsehoods going around during Hurricane Sandy, during other big news events. There were people spreading bogus stories that seemed like they might be true, and they were sort of amazing, and so they were shared really widely. But actually, there was nothing behind them. Somebody had just made them up or misinterpreted something. I argued at the time, in a way, a retweet is an endorsement. And if you share something uncritically on Twitter, you are amplifying that message. And I think maybe you should take a little bit of responsibility for that. And I think the same thing could apply when you share stuff on Facebook.
So Facebook they have tweaked their algorithm to get rid of clickbait, or, to get rid of stories that are, I guess, not fake journalism, but now, I mean, just recently this week, they've said that they're going to do something to talk a little bit about what they said they would do this or last week about eliminating fake news sources.
Yeah, so on Monday, when this whole fake news, last Monday, as you're listening to this, a week ago Monday, as this whole fake news controversy came to a head, Google stepped forward and said, we are no longer going to, we're gonna find fake news sites, and we're not going to allow them to advertise in our ad network anymore. And then a few hours later, Facebook said, "Oh yeah, us too. Good idea. We'll do that too." So I mean, it wasn't like the boldest move by Facebook going out on a limb here, but it's something. I mean, I think it's unlikely to have a huge impact. The BuzzFeed reporter who's been in touch with some of these people in Macedonia making up fake news talked to them, and they said, yeah, that's not going to affect us. We're going to keep doing this. So I don't think that's going to solve the problem. But it's something. It's Facebook acknowledging that there is a problem and that it cares about it. I think to me, one of the most fascinating things here is what responsibilities Facebook does consider itself to have. And ultimately, Facebook sees its users as the arbiters of what's good, what's worthwhile and what isn't. I mean, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, its users' engagement that's the foundation for Facebook's value as a company. So it used to just study what people liked or what people clicked on Facebook, and its algorithm would use those behavioral signals to circulate things far and wide. Over the years, it has realized that can be gamed. I mean, you can write a post on Facebook where either the headline or the little text you write above the headline is specifically geared to get people to hit the like button. You can people even used to say, hit like on this post, and tons of people would do it because why the hell not? It takes them half a second, and then Facebook would take that as a signal. Oh, this post must be really amazing. And then the next thing you know, everybody's feed was full of stupid, shallow posts that just were begging people to hit the like button. Facebook realized that this wasn't working, and so they started looking, what other forms of data could we feed into this algorithm that would counterbalance that. So one thing they did is they started actually punishing sites that said like this post in their Facebook posts. But they also started looking at things like, if people clicked on a story, how long did they spend reading it? Did they hit like before they read that story, or did they read the story and then come back and hit like? Because maybe that means that the story itself was actually good, as opposed to just the headline was something they agreed with. And over the years, they've found more and more ways to do this. Their latest big push, which I wrote about a year ago, over the last year and a half, they have impaneled thousands of people around the country and around the world to serve as a sort of group of testers, like a testing panel, and they go through their Facebook feeds on a regular basis and rate everything they see on all these different dimensions. So not only did I like this story, but did this story make me feel good about my Facebook experience? And so that's a new way that Facebook is trying to cut back on posts that are just gaming the algorithm and that don't really have a lot of substance or value. But if you drill down into what Facebook is really trying to achieve, they'll tell you our ultimate goal is to show our users what they would most want to see in their feed. That, if Facebook's algorithm were working absolutely perfectly, the top story in your feed when you open Facebook would be the same one you would choose out of all the possible stories to be at the top if you had the option and the time to go through them all. So it makes sense. It's a good strategy. It works extremely well for them. They're finding ever more complex and nuanced ways to measure that and to implement it in their algorithm. But the caveat here is, what if showing people what they want to see has adverse effects for democracy? I mean, that's a really vague, abstract term, but like, what if just showing people the things that they want to see is preventing them from seeing things that might challenge their viewpoint? What if it's preventing them from seeing their friends, interacting with their friends who disagree with them on key issues? What if it's making them think that everybody sees the world the same way they do and that there's no possible way that anyone could see it differently? That is not something that Facebook at this time considers a priority. It's not, it's not part of their mission to inform people or to challenge people or to expose people to uncomfortable truths. And I think that's part of the heart of this debate. I mean, if Facebook were to acknowledge that it has a role in the media and that it is, at least in some respects, a media company, then it might also eventually acknowledge maybe we have a responsibility to show people stuff that isn't just what they want to see or isn't just what they would seek out on their own.
Exactly. I mean, I think but the fact that it's their choice or it's Mark Zuckerberg's choice to make these big changes. I mean, he said, "Oh, that's crazy." When you say the election, didn't affect the election. Like, the election was so close. Like, we have no idea, to know what affected it. I mean, what you're saying, a lot of people this last year during the election season were saying like, "Oh, I can't go on Facebook," and saying like, "There's so many people that disagree with me." But I think that the truth is that by this time, a lot of people who spend time on Facebook have culled their feeds, and they are, even if they've not unfollowing people, they're looking and clicking and watching videos of things that they do believe in. So that's mostly what they're seeing. And so maybe a lot of people didn't feel like that. I mean, 1 million people didn't vote in this election. So maybe they didn't vote because they just thought, well, everything I believe in is being fed back to me. And so that's not, I mean, I'm not saying the travesty there is not the end, who won the election, but just the fact that people feel like they don't need to vote because everyone thinks the same thing that they do.
Yeah, I mean, that could certainly be part of it. And I think actually Mark Zuckerberg hurt his cause. He tried to diffuse this controversy over fake news by going on stage in public and taking interview questions. But he was so defensive about it. I mean, he was so dismissive of the idea that fake news could have any impact that the media, the skeptical folks in the media who were listening and watching, including me, were like, "Come on!" I mean, the idea that fake news had no impact. He said it's a crazy idea to think that false stories on Facebook had any impact on the election. Well, okay, so Mark Zuckerberg says that 99% of content on Facebook is authentic. That is a statistic that he offers with no evidence for it, and so we don't know exactly what he means by that. If 80% of the stuff on Facebook is people sharing photos of their family, then it's not really that meaningful that 99% is authentic. But even if it were true that less than 1% of the news stories being shared on Facebook were totally made up, it's not inconceivable that could influence the election. I mean, the election is contested on the margins. It's the 90 whatever percent of people who already had their minds made up before the campaign even started, they're not really relevant to the election. The people who are relevant to the election are the ones who are on the fence, and not even necessarily on the fence about whether to vote for Clinton or Trump. There probably weren't that many people who were really on that fence, but on the fence about whether it's worth going out to vote and support their candidate, whether their candidate is worthy of not only them going out to vote, but them calling all their family members or going out and canvassing. I mean, these are the marginal differences that can make the difference between Hillary Clinton winning Michigan and Donald Trump winning Michigan, when you're talking about a margin of maybe tens of thousands of votes between them. So of course it could have had an impact. And for Mark Zuckerberg to say that it had no impact, I mean, it's just disingenuous, because if what people read in Facebook had no impact on their decisions, then why is Facebook, a $250 billion advertising company? Why would you advertise on Facebook if what people see there has no impact on what they do?
So I see Facebook's fake news problem as similar to Twitter's harassment problem, in that everyone knows that this is a problem. It's most of us would agree that it's morally repugnant that people are using Facebook to spread fast news, that there's fake news, and also that people are using Twitter to harass people. But there's a line at which people enjoy reading the fake news. People enjoy watching other people be harassed or participating in a harassing way. And so that means more clicks, more views for Twitter, more time spent on Facebook. And so there comes a point at which then it becomes something that someone says, I'm not going to use Twitter anymore. I'm not going to support it. I'm not going to use Facebook anymore. So it has to sort of get to that point. I mean, you said this over what Facebook did about their ad targeting, being able to limit ads to certain ethnic affinities. I think you said this on Twitter or in an article that Facebook will do what it can until it gets caught. And stop doing it. So, do you agree that this is a similar problem between Twitter and Facebook?
Yeah. So first of all, I do agree that there are parallels. There are the ones you mentioned, and then there are other parallels. Let me say for a second, I think that was a little unfair of me. That was a case where the 140 character limit on Twitter can encourage you to say something that's much more simplified than what you actually believe. I don't think Facebook is evil. I know people who work there. I know a lot of good people who work there. It is a company that does, at least to some extent, care about its impact on the world. I mean, I may disagree about their perception of their role in the media or their impact on the election. I don't think it's fair to say that Facebook will do whatever it can until it gets caught. I think, and I just want to make this clear. I mean, I write critically about the tech industry all the time. I think we absolutely have to be skeptical of what they tell us, because they're huge global for-profit companies, and their ultimate goal is to make money. That said, I do think they also, the current crop of Silicon Valley companies, they do have some moral compass. They do, they do have limits as to what they will attempt. It's not just not wanting to get caught. I mean, I think they care, but I think they also are subject to the same forces that any of the rest of us are subject to, which is that we tend to justify what's in our own interest. And I think for Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's trying to ruin political discourse. I think he genuinely believes that Facebook is a force for good, but I think that a lot of his reasoning, there's this phrase motivated reasoning, a lot of his reasoning about Facebook's impact is motivated by what's good for Facebook and what he wants for Facebook, and what he believes and what he hopes. So that was a lengthy digression, but I just want to say I criticize these tech companies all the time. I think we have to do that. At the same time, I don't think they're pure evil. But to get to your other point, I mean, about Facebook and Twitter and the similarities there, I think it's interesting. I mean, harassment on Twitter and fake news on Facebook are similar in that they're hard to measure. I mean, they're not easily captured in one of those digital readouts that tells you in real time, in the Facebook office, how fast pages are loading. You can't tell in real time how many people are being misinformed or misled by the stuff they're reading in their feeds. On Twitter, you can see how many people, Twitter can tell how many people are using it, what the engagement is, all that sort of thing on a near real time basis. But what they can't tell is how many people just read, a tweet in their mention that was like the final straw, or that was maybe, just one in a series of abusive tweets that they've read that are making them more and more likely to eventually quit or just to use Twitter less. That's a thing that's really hard to measure. And so I think it is a problem for both these companies. It doesn't mean they don't care, but when you are data driven, you also have to be aware of what your data is not telling you. And one thing that Facebook and Twitter's data is not telling them is, what are the side effects of what people are reading here, and how is what they're reading affecting their perception of the platform as a whole, and their loyalty to it and their enthusiasm for it in the long term.
I'm glad that you brought up data, because that's a lot of people these past 2 weeks have been talking about it, and even I think you wrote in May after the primaries that this was not a failure of data. That's not knowing what was going to happen in the election. Can you talk a little bit about that? What role data played, and whether we can trust it in the future?
You see the big nerdy smile on my face. I love talking about data. Data. There was this idea both after the primaries and after the general election that data lied to us, or that data steered us wrong. The New York Times, which I really respect as a publication, had a story about all the ways that data misled us in the election. Data doesn't lead. Data doesn't lead. It doesn't mislead. It doesn't steer us. Data is data. It's up to us to interpret the data. It's up to us what data we collect and what data we don't collect. It's up to us how much weight to give the data. It's up to us to look at our interpretations of the data and wonder if we might be wrong, or if there might be something we're missing. So it wasn't data that told us that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election, and it wasn't data that was wrong about that. It was the data that we had chosen to gather, or the data that we had been able to gather, and the weight that we placed on that, and the confidence we placed in it. That was where we went wrong. And so I think this is it's an important distinction to keep in mind. I mean, using data in your decisions, you can go wrong in all sorts of ways, but it's not because the data, it's not because data is inherently evil, or that data is lying to you. It's because you're only getting a part of the picture. Anytime you're looking at data, you're talking about some portion of the overall picture. And if you place too much weight on that portion, then you're going to miss a bunch of other stuff that is not, that's data too, but it's just not data that you happen to have in front of you, or it's not data that you're able to measure, or it's not data that you're paying attention to.
So someone equating like this fake news, like, fake news affected the election and data affected the election. What you're saying is that's primarily wrong to say that, because data is just bigger and more up to interpretation than these fake news stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's the abstract point. But I think to get a little bit more practical about it, the polling data that we had, gave people a lot of confidence that Hillary Clinton was gonna win. One thing I do think was overlooked, if we're getting into the data debate for a second, Nate Silver, who is held up in this weird way as like this it's like he's an oracle or something. It's like he has access to this crystal ball of data, and then whatever he tells us is what data tells us. He's just somebody who's using all sorts of empirical and predictive techniques, and aggregating data from different sources. But anyway, Silver actually did say that we have a lot more uncertainty in this election than we've had in elections past. I mean, he said that based on the data we have, it looks like Hillary Clinton's going to win, but there's also a real possibility that Donald Trump wins, especially in the Electoral College. He was pretty confident that Clinton would take the popular vote, but he saw a number of possible scenarios in which Trump could win the election nonetheless. And one of those was in fact borne out. That doesn't mean that he was right or he was wrong. The outcome cannot prove Nate Silver right or wrong. All the outcome can do is all we can do if we want to see whether Nate Silver was right or wrong is to look at his methods and see whether they were right or wrong. But in any case, I'm probably going way off topic here. But I do think that we have to take a harder look at the polling data we have, and this is just a symptom of a bigger problem where we tend to place faith in the data that we're able to collect, or the data that we've collected that has in the past predicted outcomes. Doesn't mean that those same data are going to be reliable in predicting future outcomes. And so I think it's a reminder that that the data we have is never the whole picture, and that we have to think hard about what the data is actually telling us.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about data, not just because you like it, but because I want to talk about its influence beyond the election. But first, I have to take a minute to thank our sponsor, and that's CuriosityStream. Now, CuriosityStream is for people that are watching this, people who want to learn new things, who want to have access to more entertainment that you can end up feeling like you've learned something at the end. CuriosityStream is the world's first ad-free, non-fiction streaming service. It was founded by John Hendricks, who is the founder of the Discovery Channel. There are over 1,500 titles, 600 hours of content, and over 50 plus hours of 4K content. It's available in 196 countries worldwide. They're available on many platforms. It's on the web, Roku, Android, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Amazon Kindle, and Apple TV. You can try it on your Apple TV. You can browse through and see some of the different things that you can watch before you sign up. You can take a look and say, was that something that I'm interested in? I think most people who are curious are going to find something that they're going to want to spend time watching. And if you're feeling right now that you want to distract yourself a little bit from what's going on, this is a great way to do it. There's a wide variety of science and technology content, nature, history, and so many more topics. In addition to documentaries, they also have interviews and lecture. Their library includes Stephen Hawking's Favorite Places. That's a brand new exclusive documentary where Stephen Hawking pilots a fantastical CGI spaceship across the universe, making stops at Saturn and many of his other favorite destinations. They also have Deep Time History, something else you can watch. It's an exclusive 3-part original documentary series that tells the story of the universe's 14 billion year history, including surprising twists to the stories that you thought that you knew. Underwater Wonders of the National Parks. In celebration of the National Park Service's centennial year, this exclusive 7-part series takes you on a journey below the bodies of water within America's national parks. So you can have a monthly or you can sign up for an annual plan. Both are available, with annual plans offering significant savings. Plans start at just $2.99 a month. That's much less than what you'd pay on competing on-demand platforms. Check out curiositystream.com/twit and use the promo code TWIT, that's TWIT, during sign-up, and you'll get unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and nonfiction series. You'll get that completely free for the first 60 days. That's a lot of time to decide. It's 2 entire months free of one of the largest nonfiction 4K libraries around. Imagine what you could watch in those 60 days just for free. curiositystream.com/twit and use the offer code TWIT at sign up. So we were talking about data before the break, and Will, what do you think if all of this data didn't tell us what we needed to know, or we didn't interpret the data right? Do you think that's happening with Facebook, the people at Facebook and Twitter? Do you think these internet companies are seeing this data and possibly, having so much faith in it and interpreting it wrong?
Yeah, certainly, all the time, every day. But they, to their credit, they know it. And Facebook especially, when you talk to the people who are in charge of things like the newsfeed algorithm, they deal with this on a daily basis. They know better than almost any of us all the ways that data can steer you wrong, because they've been steered wrong, countless times over the years by data, and here now I'm repeating the mistake that I just criticized other people for. They have steered wrong through their interpretation of data, through by relying on data that tell them about one story but maybe miss another story. And so they think really critically about this stuff. I talked a little bit earlier about how Facebook used to use likes and clicks as the real crucial driver in how it would rank stories in your news feed. And then it realized that this was filling the news feed with posts that were just designed to get people to like and click rather than stuff that people actually cared about. And so one of the things one of the ways you can go wrong in basing your decisions on data is by sort of missing the more human side of things, but by missing the more qualitative side of things, right? So you can count likes and clicks, but you can't distinguish between them. Was this a like that did someone hit like because they, because the post told them to hit like? Did they hit like because it was a post mentioning that their team won? Did they hit like because the story might not have been true, but it appealed to their political sensibilities? Or did they hit like because they read something and it had, it resonated deeply with them? Maybe it changed their entire life and they hit like for that reason. The data on the number of likes cannot tell you the difference between those things. And there's a world of difference between those two things. And Facebook would much rather show people the life-changing stories. It would rather show people the stories where people hit like because because this was exactly the kind of thing that they come to Facebook for, and because they didn't know that that their old college friend had gotten married or had a baby, and they're really genuinely happy to have seen that, or because they read the best long form investigative story and they just they wouldn't have found it without Facebook. If people are hitting like for that reason, that's great. And so what Facebook did, one of its many responses to this problem, was to do this more, to start doing more and more surveys and to do this panel of testers where it's actually asking people, why did you hit like on the story? What does that mean to you? And so the same thing is true across any number of sectors. We were talking about media earlier. I think a lot of media companies, especially online, fell into the trap of making decisions based on the data that they had at hand, which was the data on how many unique viewers a story was getting, or how many concurrent viewers it had, or how many Facebook likes it had. And that tells you something. It tells you how popular a story is. It tells you whether your headline is something that people want to click on. But what it doesn't tell you is how many of those people who clicked on the story read it and were like, God, this is absolute trash. I am never coming back to this site again. And I will badmouth it to all of my friends, right? So you might be running stories where your data on page views is telling you, man, this is a huge hit. People love this. And so you're going to put out more and more stories like that. And all the while, some portion of the people who are clicking on it are hating it and saying, I'm never falling for that crap again. And you wake up one day and, you realize that you don't have a loyal readership because they've hated all the crap that you've been putting it out while you've been chasing clicks or page views.
And you say, you wrote a piece when Facebook earlier this year came out with the new emotions. So it's not just the thumbs up now, it's the angry or sad or surprised. And they sort of came out and said, we're doing this because, if your best friend writes a post about how their dog died, you don't want to like it, but you want to support them. So now we let you show this crying face. But really, this is just giving Facebook even more data, like even more insights into how we specifically feel about things.
Yeah, it's a nice racket, isn't it? Every time Facebook gives its users new ways to express themselves or to react to posts or that kind of thing, there's a double purpose. One is for the users, but the other one, and I think the one that's often overlooked or underrated, is for Facebook's own purposes. It's richer data for them. If they can see if all of a sudden, instead of just being able to measure the number of likes on a post, they can see whether people are doing the thumbs up or doing the heart or doing the crying face or the angry face, that gives them all sorts of new insights into what the reaction to this post actually was. And they can do things with that in their algorithm. And maybe, I don't know that they're doing this or that they aren't doing this, but maybe they decide at some point that, your ideal, maybe they run all these tests and find that really the ideal blend of emotions in your news feed is maybe like 60% happy stuff, 20% stuff that makes you laugh, 20% stuff that makes you cry, and 10% stuff that makes you angry. Maybe they start incorporating that into the ranking algorithm. It's all the data that they can gather. It's to their credit because, as I said, the richer that your data is, the more nuanced interpretations it's going to allow for, and they're very shrewd about this, about gathering new forms of data all the time. And we don't always see it as the users because they don't pitch it that way. They don't come out and tell us, hey, we've just rolled out 5 new ways for us to study your behavior on Facebook. They say, hey, we've just given you new options to react to a post on Facebook. And it's going to be good for you because it allows you to convey what you're feeling to the person who posted. And that's true, too. They're both true.
And they got a little bit in hot water recently. I brought up the ethnic affinity controversy. So they all of us have an ethnic affinity. They don't show, Facebook doesn't show it to us, but and we don't necessarily know what it is. But based on all the things we like, based on our friends, based on what videos we watch, how long they think that we are some ethnic affinity. And so they got in trouble recently because ProPublica, Julia Angwin, wrote a piece where they put an ad, which they called a real estate ad, and they said they wanted to limit it, and they wanted to not include anyone with the ethnic affinity, the Asian or African American ethnic affinity, and it was approved in 15 minutes, and they got in trouble for that. People were complaining this is against the law, especially because it had to do with real estate, with living. It was, the Civil Rights Act. It was against that. And then they turned around and said, we're not going to do that. First, they defended it, as they have before, and said, this is what we do. We do this this is how advertising has always worked. And this is what we were talking about. This was your response, was they do this until they get in trouble, which you elaborated in before. But they turned around and said, we're not going to do this anymore, which really struck me as they work fast. And democracy does not work that fast. So, whereas, that's the problem with democracy. It works slowly. But in some ways, like maybe now and this time, if you don't agree with some of the policies that Donald Trump's talked about, it's their benefit that democracy works slowly, right? Because he might not be able to do all these things. So what do you think the benefit for Facebook having so much power and working so quickly? Do you see that as an overall benefit because they can be agile and make this change? Or are they getting in more trouble by being able to work more quickly than, say, democracy?
You're raising some really fascinating points and great questions. I don't think anybody who tells you that they know overall whether Facebook's move fast and break things mentality is good for the world or bad for the world. I mean, that's not a question that I think is reasonably answerable. But I do think that, as you pointed out, I mean, there are pros and cons to this. And this is the Silicon Valley ethos, which is like, let's experiment, let's try new things, let's use the power of computing, let's use the power of internet to do things in a way that they haven't been done before. And let's just try it, and maybe it'll work. And that's wonderful. I mean, that spirit of experimentation has been a huge driver of our economy. It's in my opinion, a big reason why the United States is still, the most dynamic economy in the world. It is. We have to have that, and at the same time, we have to have people who are looking at it with a skeptical eye, because when you move fast and break things, some of the things you break are going to be, outmoded, dumb conventions that we didn't need anyway, and it's good that we broke them. Some of the things you break are going to be things that were there for a reason, and you haven't, in most cases, you probably haven't thought through that reason. I mean, if you're a programmer or you're a for-profit company or a startup that's trying new things, your incentives are to get engagement, to get publicity, to make money, to satisfy your investors. You have all these incentives, but you don't have a great incentive to study history and see whether the thing that you're breaking is something that has value. And so in this case, Facebook found a clever way to, in what I'm sure was their view, just give advertisers, more finely honed tools to make sure that they're reaching the right people with their ads through the use of these ethnic affinities that Facebook assigned to people, by the way, without their knowledge or consent. Although you can opt out to some extent if you know about it, which Facebook isn't going to tell you about it, but you can read about it. So anyway, Facebook, from Facebook's viewpoint, it was like, oh, we found a cool new way to let people target their ads. Well, it turns out that we have laws on the books about the language that you use in real estate ads, and there are really good reasons for that because of the history in this country of housing discrimination and redlining and of white people not wanting to live next to black people and using tricky methods to keep them out. And so what Facebook essentially built was they built a tool that would allow for real estate ads that excluded minorities, and that's terrible. I mean, they broke something that shouldn't have been broken. And that they reacted defensively is disappointing. Initially their reaction was defensive. That's disappointing to me. It is not at all surprising. Again, you got to remember this is a for-profit company. Their role is to defend their interests. At the same time, they do care about not being evil. It's maybe not maybe not the biggest driver of all of their decisions. But if they get called on something, they will, I think, in a lot of cases, introspect and say, you know what, that is bad. Or if nothing else, I mean, if the PR storm gets bad enough, they'll change things just to make the controversy go away. But they are, I think it did show that they can be pretty responsive when it's clear that they screwed up. And right now with the fake news, we're in an earlier stage of that where we're still debating with whether Facebook screwed up. And we'll see what changes they make in response to that.
Well, I, for one, am glad you never responded to that email from Mark Zuckerberg, because maybe he would have convinced you to come work at Facebook and not go to journalism school and not be this good media.
Maybe I would be up there today telling you and telling the world that Facebook is definitely not a media company, that we are absolutely a technology company, and that that we are a force for good and for openness. And all this stuff about fake news is just it's just a sideshow, and we shouldn't worry about it.
Well, I'm grateful you're not. Will Oremus is a technology reporter at Slate, covering technology and how it intersects with politics and life and the media. And you, some might call you part of the media, but you're also looking at the media with a critical eye. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. This kind of in-depth conversation is great, and it's rare in the media today, and I applaud you guys for it.
Well, thank you. Take care, Will.
All right.
And thanks to you for watching or listening, or both, to Triangulation. We record Triangulation live every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific. That is 2 p.m. Eastern, and you can figure out the UTC. You have a calculator. And if you can't watch us live, we would love it if you subscribed, and you could subscribe at twit.tv/TRI. That's twit.tv/TRI. And if anyone lets you leave a comment on YouTube or anywhere else, iTunes, we'd love to know what you think. And yeah, join us in the chat room at live.twit.tv to ask your questions on the next Triangulation. Thanks for coming.